session.
Yeah.
Moving on to regular business meeting, public forum. John.
We have received 2 requests to address the board. The first is Marcy Ellis, who wishes to address the recent election. We'll make sure it comes on. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm feeling a little fish out of water, so it's a little impressive to be here. I'm a little bit frightened. I was thrilled to see the Gaylords. I have to tell you, I knew them in good years, so I had to come. And being here, I had to take advantage of just some comments I wanted to make. I live in Oak Creek Canyon. We're across the street from the fire station. I've even had an ambulance ride in. The people are wonderful. We love the fire department and all the work that you guys are doing. And of course, during the fire, you were all right there, all the fire guys. The only comment I had on the recent election, I go to Ollie, I do the lifelong learning, and I do other classes at the library. And everywhere I've been, I've seen this young man talking about the bond issue. I'm giving information. I'm from years of working for a nonprofit and had to raise a lot of money. I've never done it by myself. My board has always been there. And I guess my comment, and I had to say this, was I was really disappointed not to see the board being the one who was out there taking the arrows that some of the people shot. The board can do that. They don't have to advocate, they can be information, but I heard a lot of bad comments about someone that I think has worked hard from what I've seen. I don't know anyone very well in the area. I'm very nervous here, so excuse me. But this is just a comment that should it happen again, my experience with my board is I can't work without the board's support. And I felt the board was not visible and should have been, instead of letting the employee take some of the barbs that and all they were doing was explaining. So that's just my comment. I hope you look at it for another time, because we all hope that there will be good facilities in the area and lots of wonderful people like we just saw get awards and badges. So thank you very much for giving me a minute. Thank you.
Our next citizen is W. Spring, and he has a question regarding traffic.
Good afternoon, board members. About 6 months ago, I sat in a Sedona City Council meeting in which a lady who lived up someplace south of the Midgley Bridge talked about her experience, and it ended up she was playing bridge with some friends of mine. She had a heart attack, and the response time, because of traffic, was 35 minutes to get to her, and then coming back down there on driving on lawns and everything else, and it was pretty hair-raising. She had apparently a second heart attack in the vehicle. I know your typical response time is 5-6 minutes, something like that, but I'm wondering, and we're looking at this now, a group of us, I represent several dozen people who are having real concerns when we'll watch on Dante out 89, and I've sat through 3 and 4 cycles of the light just to get someplace. I'm from Wisconsin, went to a Badger party at the end of Soldiers Pass. I live in West Sedona, 35 minutes to get there. And if you guys have done any study, you know, kind of fiduciary obligation to look at this real big issue for a lot of us people, because as you all know and I know, about 90% of the calls are stroke and heart attack, et cetera, as the chief well knows, that running response times during high traffic, like during movie week, when people are walking right out in the middle of the road, or bicycle week, or taco week, or we have festivals now, we have 30 some a year planned to look at response times, getting to some of the more difficult areas like Soldiers Pass. That's all our latest big traffic study and all kinds of ways to ameliorate the problem. But to just do it, the fire and the EMT, during some of those bad times to see what effect it has on your response time. I would think that would be like a number one priority for the board and the department.
Mr. Spring, I'd like to get that incident and verify the 35-minute response time and try to address your concerns as it relates to that specific.
Nothing you did wrong.
I'd like to confirm it was 35-minute response time.
About 6 months ago, she's on tape on the city council meeting. I'll try to figure out which one it was. I just sat there
If
listening.
you give me your name and I can look her up that way, I appreciate it. So not now in the public meeting.
City council, I'd have to go to the city council meeting, but I know how to find it.
Thank you, sir.
And lastly, we have a request from Jeff Patura.
So, dear Dwight, at your request, I offer my apologies for posting to the Sedona VOC Facebook page, is their website, comments relating to you and your team creating a forged document that appeared to be official and was used by you and the Arizona Liberty in this year's Sedona Fire District bond election to inform voters. Sincerely, Jeff Patura. Here's your written copy.
Okay. So all
That's all.
right, moving on to consent agenda. We have one item, regular, 2017 regular board meeting minutes. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, on to bond election. Chief, you're first.
I'll stand over here, board, if that's okay. Address the public. Board, as we're aware, we just completed a bond process. We'll be doing some other official actions shortly. But before we get to that, I wanted to share a few thoughts and ideas. So please indulge me. Good evening, and let me start by saying thank you for everyone who's taken an interest in the Sedona Fire District over the past 6 months. Thank you to the 2007 and the 2017 Citizen Advisory Committees who both worked diligently to understand the long-term capital needs of this agency, the complexities of the funding needed for the projects that were identified. I would also like to say thank you to this governing board for having the courage to consider a general obligation bond as a fiscally responsible way to spread out our costs to the taxpayers for the upcoming decades. Meeting our long-range capital goals and needs. I would also be remiss to not mention a big thank you to all the Sedona Fire District staff who have worked day in and day out to serve our amazing community. Without their dedication, passion, and professionalism, much of the things we do and are so successful at simply would not happen. And lastly, and equally important, I'd like to say thank you to all the voters of Sedona Fire District for their participation in this process. The purpose of my addressing you today is to help clarify where we go from here now that the bond results are in. I'd also like to clarify a few misconceptions that were deployed during the election. I think that there may have been some people with their facts confused or maybe a political agenda that was such as to their intent was to misrepresent the facts. Election laws made it difficult for me to address these issues as they were being addressed at the time. With the election behind us, I think it's only fair for the public to be informed on what things truly are. The Sedona Fire District staff, with the help of the Citizens Advisory Committee, who met nearly a dozen times, made the recommendation to the governing board after studying the issues at great length. Most of the expenses outlined in the $17.9 million bond proposal were for buildings, replacement, and significant repairs, which are typical things found in a general obligation bond. We also talked about the need for telecommunication equipment, upgrades, and fire apparatus replacement. Starting with the buildings, the costs that were used were truly just estimates. Without any engineer drawings, the ability to get quotes is not possible. The figures were used as ballparks to help develop the total costs. We engaged with a company by the name of Core Construction, who's worked on dozen projects here in Arizona and around the country building fire stations. They have worked successfully to provide these estimates to other fire districts, and they came highly recommended by my peers. Their involvement in this process, giving us these quotes, was in no way, shape, or form a guarantee that we would contract with them for any of our needs. This was clearly stated in multiple open meetings to CORE and to you, the board, and to the Citizen Advisory Committee by me. No contracts, no promises, no quid pro quo agreements were made for any of their involvement in providing estimates by me or, to my knowledge, anyone on this governing board. Simply didn't happen. Our only goal is to maintain the ability to perform our critical functions and best serve our community. Fire stations operating at a maximum efficiency play a great role in reducing costs and response times. Our older buildings have outlived their plan and useful life. They're costing more to maintain and are not functioning to meet our needs, which were highlighted in the Citizen Advisory Committee report. We heard questions about why we're not staffing existing stations. These stations are essentially garages. One in the canyon is barely large enough to fit an apparatus, much less any personnel. We continually look at our operations and our operations model, and make sure we effectively utilize those buildings if and where possible. To staff them at this time is not feasible. I want you to know that SFD has made attempts at using volunteer and reserve personnel, and they've been unsuccessful on multiple attempts. The telecommunications part of the bond, that's how we communicate on emergency scenes, talking to one another on the fire ground or to our dispatch via the radio. The current system and equipment is aging. It needs to be upgraded. There are currently areas where the radio doesn't work. Sometimes people might think it's as easy as snapping our fingers and we can fix these things. But it's not that simple and certainly not that cheap, given our topography and limitations of where towers are or where towers can go to fix these dead spots. So during the election, some with no fire service experience or knowledge shared a solution that we should lease this equipment instead of buying it. While this certainly is an option and one that may work in other communication business models, according to our telecom manager, the two-way public service safety radio system is a completely different model, and leasing is not a good option. By our estimations and the work that our telecom manager has done, if we were to go to lease a network, it would actually cost us more, and our reliability would be likely less. So, in fact, our decisions to purchase and engineer with our in-house process will cost less and have better reliability for emergency responders. If leasing was better option, don't you think we probably would have done this by now? As for the apparatus costs, remember, the lifespan of a fire truck is typically between 15 and 18 years. We also expect that our engines, at the end of their life cycle, are set for reserve, have a reserve life. That means at the end of their life, they're used when engines break, go in for repair, or maybe are assigned to a wildfire. It's pretty much a best practice to have a reserve engine. We haven't had one since the Station 6 was opened. I actually heard somebody say that we're living beyond our means by having a reserve engine. I don't think that's the case. Now, having this capital improvement plan really is looking forward. It creates a responsible financial impact and how it's going to fit into our budgets going forward. And it establishes the funding for those plans, which I believe is responsible. It's best practice and should be mandated, in my opinion. The capital improvement plan of late 2000s and early 2010s were essentially abandoned by prior boards and the Great Recession. Coming off a 43% decrease in assessed value and a considerable decrease in the mill rate, while much of the capital reserve was being spent on operations, the problem was being compounded significantly before I ever even arrived. As I start my career as the fire chief of Sedona Fire District, we were at a crossroads that really created a challenge: how to maintain services, how to fund station number 6, which the governing board, some of you on the board here, directed me to build shortly after the recall election. Dealing with the passage of Prop 117 has been a challenge. It simply would have been impossible to accomplish all these tasks without increasing the mill rate and the tax levy or reduce services, which we've talked about at, I believe, every budget meeting when we decide the budget, and the board has been very clear about not cutting service. The question of the bond and all of its projects were truly aimed at enhancing public safety. While some things like fire apparatus and telecommunications may be more directly linked on impacting operations and the public, having facilities that function effectively and operate efficiently certainly have a direct impact on a quicker response and enhanced working conditions. I think you can agree on the concept of having fire stations capable of housing a modern-day fire truck certainly could impact response. Having a repair facility that actually can fit apparatus certainly has an impact on response as well. The concept of using a bond to pay for long-term capital needs was designed to spread out these costs for these projects over the next longer period of time. The cost of these projects being financed for 20+ years would certainly incur some interest. During the election, some people publicly said that they don't like to pay interest. Personally, I concur with that statement, as I don't like to pay interest in my personal life either. However, when I, like most people, make major purchases, essentially capital purchases in my private life, such as a car or a home, paying interest is a fact. In SFD's case, interest costs on these projects will come in one form or another. They would have come in form of the bond repayment, or it would have been, or will be, in a lease payment purchase option. If you're not familiar with the term, a lease payment purchase is like a mortgage. But if we took the advice of some who spoke during the election, their suggestion was to raise the mill rate to the 325 cap and collect that cash, and when you have enough cash, go forth and make the repairs and purchases that you need. Let me be clear, this process would significantly raise your fire district taxes far greater than they would if a bond would have passed. The thought proposed by some would be to save up all that money, pay for it today, for a project that's designed to last 50 years. This would mean today's taxpayers would be paying lock, stock, and barrel the entire cost of their investment, their fire station, and likely never see the return on their investment in their lifetime. I need to clarify that the Sedona Fire District was not affiliated with either of the groups that you may have heard of during the bond process. We were not on either side of the campaign. We were not in the finances of either side, and we were not in the motives behind their existence. Both campaigns stood alone and developed their own marching orders by whoever was steering either of their groups. Where each side got their information or what was sold as factual has perplexed me. I heard lots of comments that stated the information was garnered by public documents and therefore they must be true. I can tell you that there were many comments that were made that were simply not true or could not be validated. I certainly did not, and I will clear up some misinformation in a few minutes specifically. But what I must assure you is that there was never a breach of any objectivity by Sedona Fire District. There was no special treatment being given, no promises, nothing inferred, implied to either group. Any future SFD business will be completely independent of anyone's involvement or lack thereof from either side. Our commitment is and always will be to best serve our community with full disclosure, honesty, and transparency, and always looking to do what's best for our community. Looking long-term and to assure the best value is always provided on any project we start and finish. As the fire chief, my job is to lead the organization and assist the board's mission by performing the day-to-day operations of the fire district and to assure we're able to meet our goals and objectives. I would like to now take a moment and do a little housekeeping on some of the espoused things that were spoken as truth and with conviction. As we have all likely heard the term lies, damn lies, and statistics, I think we can apply the principle here. As the fire chief, I'm very busy. The last thing I'm looking for is more work. Building fire stations takes a lot of time and energy, and frankly, I would prefer to use my time and energy to influence the leadership and grow the skills and the succession plan needed for our great organization to be successful. Not chase around a general contractor to assure they're doing their job. I don't need to have my name emblazoned on a plaque for the next 50 years to have my grandkids visit. What I do need is to assure that we have the appropriate staffing, training, facilities, apparatus, and telecommunication ability to successfully serve our community for the next 50 years, long after I'm gone. There has been much said about the engineer's report that SFD commissioned. specifically to look at the feasibility. We commissioned that report specifically to look at the feasibility of Station 4's renovation versus tear down. There were plenty of comments made during the election that the report was buried because staff did not want anyone to see it. Let me assure you that the report was discussed in an open meeting and posted with all the other documents in accordance with each Citizen Advisory Committee meeting that we held, as all documents of all public meetings for SFD are published. In reading the report, the engineer clearly states in his conclusion that it may be well worth building a new fire station when compared to renovation costs of the current station. So why would we hide from this report? I'm not sure. All projects identified in the capital improvement plan and bond question were to extend the current life of existing buildings where practical and replacing them where it was not. Things like remodeling projects, and who doesn't see these kind of projects happen when buildings are 20 and 30 years old? Buildings get tired, finishes get worn, broken. There's new work efficiencies, ergonomics, things like that. SFD would like to engage those type of processes for our workforce and better our work environment. Redesign these stations where sleeping quarters were literally built in closets where spaces have no air conditioning, no heating ducts. Public spaces that do not meet with American Disability Code requirements all seem to be fair and in the good of the public in some form or fashion. There's a lot of talk about Sedona Fire District foregoing capital projects for lavish salaries and benefits. I can tell you in the last decade, the majority of our funding decisions have some connection to the Great Recession and recovering from it, as well as those actions of past boards. However, specifically about the 30% increase in salaries that was sold as the truth, I will tell you on my arrival, salaries have been frozen for years. Morale was terrible. A concerted effort was made to increase morale and deal with those frozen salaries. Simply put, we needed to maintain our workforce and assure salaries were in compliance with the market value and benchmarking with inflation. Did you know that in 2012, a starting firefighter at Sedona Fire District, a firefighter EMT, made $13.71 an hour? Today, the same firefighter EMT position, those three guys we just swore in, they're starting at $15.23 an hour. Yes, a firefighter with extensive mandatory certifications and education, trained to save lives, begins their career at cents above the new proposed minimum wage. Also take into consideration that inflation occurred in all those years. It's pretty much paced the same as those collecting Social Security increases for those residents that have gotten in their Social Security increases. To be transparent, SFD, like most public agencies, has a step process that firefighter and employees go through while being employed. And at the end of that step cycle, in 6 years, a firefighter will be making $20.41, a firefighter EMT. That's the last raise they receive in their employment. Unless there's a cost of living raise, they take a promotion like the two people we saw today, or there's an adjustment by the board, a salary adjustment. As the chief, I have no authority to make any of those adjustments happen. In the past 6 years, we've been working to increase the funding of capital projects. We've purchased 2 new fire engines, refurbished 1 engine, bought 3 new ambulances. We're refurbishing an ambulance as we speak. We built a much-needed fire station, and we've developed a conscious plan to prioritize the necessary capital projects and develop a plan going forward to schedule the remaining projects in the next 10 years. We've also worked diligently to enhance our telecommunication and IT needs in this process. All of this is expensive, and all of it takes time. This is why we've been ramping up the amount of money we've been spending on capital each year. Somebody once said that we've done nothing since I've been the chief for capital, and that's just simply not true again. This brings me to another point. I heard that the increase in the levy and the budget under my leadership, affectionately termed Kasian's watch, is out of control. I have to share with you, the salaries were frozen. There was little or almost no capital being spent when I arrived, and we just got off that Great Recession I've spoke to a few times. This was a recipe for disaster as an incoming fire chief. There was only one place to go, and that was the mill rate to go up and the levy to go up, or to cut services, as I said before. I think if you really take a look at the 10-year analysis of the Sedona Fire District, you will see that the levy has only increased 3.6% over 10 years. 3.6% over 10 years. And the overall budget is only 6.3% increased over 10 years. We've increased service, we've added a station, we've added personnel, operational personnel. You can see that I think that's tracking pretty reasonably. It puts things in perspective and paints a much different picture. However, if you choose to grab the lowest of the low and only look from that point forward, I certainly think that you do have a different picture, which was presented. A good example of this would be, I took a look at a concerned citizen's tax bill from 2008. In 2008, that person's tax bill was $1,052 to the Sedona Fire District. And in 2017, that same individual tax bill is $1,076. 10 years later, the increase is less than $25 over 10 years. Again, there's a dip in the middle, but over 10-year time, that's pretty good. Remember, for me, we either cut stations, cut personnel, reduce service, or we had to raise. And that process was done with all the boards each and every year as we approved those budgets, not just me. As a fire chief, I expect to be the target of many complaints and criticism. Quite frankly, it goes with the territory. What I would not expect would be people attacking me personally, on my personal character and my passion in which I serve this community. To be called arrogant, out of control, lacking leadership, fiscally mismanaging the district, those are reckless and borderline libel, slanderous statements to my character and my credibility. They're unmerited and in some cases the opposite of what's actually occurred under my leadership. I've devoted the last nearly 6 years to making tough decisions to our employees when it comes to salaries and benefits. I've worked to develop a sustainable solution path for us to follow while realizing employee satisfaction is real. Remuneration to employees for their hard work, their dedication, and professional service that they put forth each and every day must be recognized. This is not always easy for myopic, number-oriented individuals, but I am steadfast in my quest for assuring that salaries and benefits are equitable with the public safety market and sustainable for the future. Under my watch, we've lowered vacation and sick leave accruals. We've reduced holiday pay benefits, which has saved in excess of $100,000 a year annually. We've not replaced employees who have left. We've consolidated dispatch operations, saving nearly $400,000 annually. We've utilized outside financial management firm at a third of the cost than what we were paying, and only added employees where we needed to add for functional need. Overall, our employee count is down. At its highest, we had 118 employees. At the end of fiscal year 17, we had 93. I do recall there being talk of an exploding employee count under Kasian watch, but I think you can see that's not the case. We've also heard things like Station 6 only goes on one call a day. Well, that may be accurate in the calls that originate nearest its station. We call that the still district. That only tells part of the story. Station 6, in fact, responded to over 700 calls last year, with 225 of them being in their still district. Station 6 is a very, very valuable part of our response capabilities, and it's always been designated as it's operating today. Some may recall we had 3 bays slated. It's been reduced to 2, again for cost containment under Kasian watch. And we completed this project under budget, mind you. And to clarify another statement I heard, at no time was it ever deemed an ambulance-only fire station. That was never a plan. I want to be clear. I asked numerous times to try and explain things, answer questions, and try to build better communications with what appeared to be an engaged and concerned group of citizens. The only responses I got back were, please don't contact me, or I did get an ultimatum to meet under terms and conditions which had a potential conflict with election laws and certainly seemed to have a motive designed for less than healthy discussions. I still do and always will hold the offer to meet with anyone who has a question or who would like to learn more about the Sedona Fire District. So how will we move forward? Maybe a surprise to some, but the bond election was truly not about what people wanted or didn't want. It was about how to fund those needs. In the end, none of those needs were erased after last week's election. It only shifted us to consider other funding options. Many seem to think that if the bond was approved, we'd get a Brinks truck backed up to the office here, and they'd drop $17.9 million off on my desk, and I could spend it any way I wanted. In fact, that would have simply give us access to what is essentially a credit line, and any accessing those funds would require board action. And we would spend that money over the next 10 years for capital projects. We didn't have any obligation to spend all the money. If those estimates were ending up high and we didn't spend the entire amount, we wouldn't spend the entire amount. We'll need to work with staff and the governing board to determine how to best go forward. We must replace station number 5. We'll have to set a plan in motion. We have a set plan in motion with Arizona State Parks to build a station at Slide Rock. I want to further confirm that Arizona State Parks is excited for our project on their property. I believe that the NEPA study has been done, and there might be just a small little piece to finish up, but the lion's work has been done as it relates to the NEPA environmental study on the project, and the joint venture has got a green light from the state parks. Station 4 still has significant issues. It still cannot fit a modern-day fire truck, even with renovation. It still has significant cracks in the apparatus floor. It has a bowing wall. It has parts of the building that are over the lot line. It still doesn't facilitate quick and effective response to the bay floor for firefighters. And how long this is all going to be acceptable remains to be seen. An exciting thing about Station 4, I want to remind everyone, is recently with the help of Supervisor Ryan, we were able to get a quick claim deed signed over to us, and the property, which was once owned by Coconino County, has been transferred to Sedona Fire District at zero cost to the taxpayers, making further projects a little bit easier. So will we attempt another bond? Will we need to raise the mill rate? What can we cut from the budget to free up funds to fund these projects? Those are all things that we have to take care of looking forward in the next budgeting process. Remember, I have a $5,000 spending limit. I can only do so much without your authority. So my carefree spending and ability to fiscally mismanage happens at $5,000 at a crack. We need to talk to the board. We need to get your thoughts as we look at the budget going forward. I suspect we'll be having some of those conversations in January of 2018 as we begin our budget process working with finance. All of this withstanding, I've taken an oath to each and every one of you, to serve each and every one of you, even the ones who have threatened my job. I can tell you, I could not be more proud of my service to this community. We've accomplished great things in the time I've been here, and there's many more things on the horizon. I believe I may be the longest tenured fire chief in Sedona's 60-year history. I say that not as a brag, but as a sign that this community has lacked tenure leadership for a long time. Continued turnover of leadership just because some folks are out there lobbing grenades is not a healthy solution. I will look to duck and cover where needed and lead through the challenging times. I will be at the front lines, navigating the tough times and appreciating the smooth sailing times. That's what a leader does. I've always have and always will have my door open. I love talking to the community and sharing what's happening at Sedona Fire. But what I will not do is allow people to sabotage the hard work of the last 60 years or perpetuate lies and myth truths about Sedona Fire District. I will be at any HOA meeting. I will be at every small group that wants me to talk to them. I'll go to every coffee clutch. Wherever I got to go, I will attend and talk to people and share what we do so well. Our records are open. We'd love to share that with the people who want to learn more. I have nearly 28 years of experience in the business, and I work alongside Jeff Pichura, who's got 38 years, and I believe that between the two of us, we kind of know what we're doing. Those who have never worked in the fire department business certainly cannot read the Fire District for Dummy book and then expect to be the fire chief overnight. Simply doesn't work that way. I want to end with a few thoughts. I hope my conviction and passion are felt by all. I hope that while bullying seems to be in vogue for folks in some parts of the government, I will not back down. I can assure you that I will not run our local government via Facebook or Twitter. I cannot be responsible for spending my days and nights trolling social media for comments or looking for angry citizens voicing their thoughts on an unofficial communication method. I will only be responding to concerns that are funneled through the proper channels through district emails, face-to-face conversations, public record requests, or through public comments at board meetings. I cannot tell you the number of hours that have already been wasted chasing down red herrings and straw man arguments on social media. I can assure you I will continue to serve all of you with a smile and with the same excitement that I had on my first day here in 2012. I'm honored and humbled to work with such great people in such an incredible community. We will always be here to serve you when we're dispatched to a call, and our mission will never stray. We're safe, friendly, and dedicated, providing that to each and every one of you each and every day. With that, I ask the board if you'd have to have any other comments or questions as it relates to the bond process or anything that you may want to tie into what I just spoke to.
Thank you, Chief. Yes, I do. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Citizens Advisory Committee that was put together of people who live within our community, people like you and I and from our audience out there. It was a process that I was unaware of its complexity and the enormous amount of work it takes to do until I got involved with it. Unlike our first speaker, as she suggested that the board needed to be more involved, I can say that this board member was involved. I had an opportunity to speak to what I consider the most affluent social business group there is here in Sedona, and met a lot of fine people, on both sides of the cause. It was an opportunity that I'm glad I was able to do that. I also got a chance to sit in on some of the League of Women Voters forum that they had. Again, I met a lot of people there, both pro and con. Both had their reasons for their beliefs, and so I could only respect that. The amount of the bond, without a doubt, was a lot of money. It was reduced down from what was documented from what, if we were to do everything, it was
26 million.
26 million. We reduced it down to 17.9, still a lot of money. I'm not so sure what amount would have been the magic amount that everybody would have been happy with. Possibly that never would have been, because I don't think, based on what I saw, was ever the amount of money the question. It got very quickly to the point of management styles and personalities. And somehow, some way, numbers were twisted around. And for every number that was twisted one way, it could have been twisted the other. So it was an eye-opener, to say the least. But what amazed me most was the fact that the voters of the community were able to speak up via the vote and vote the way they felt. And that's the way this system works. My hat's off to those, the victors, those against the bond, although I wish it would have been the other way. But as the chief relegated to, there's always plan B and plan C, and we have to regroup and figure out how we're going to accomplish those things that need to be done. So this board member feels that the kicking of the can down the road, as has been described to those before us, we gave it our best shot to stop that, and the voters voiced their opinion otherwise. So we'll continue to work hard, as you said, Chief. I appreciate everything you did. The board, I think, recognizes that. I don't speak on behalf of the entire board, but maybe they'll speak up. And I look forward to working with those that were against the bond. There is value, and to their point, there's always the checks and balances. I'd also looking forward to working more with our written media that we have here in Sedona. Some of their timely report writing, I had to take with a grain of salt, but let that be as it may. But I do look forward to moving on and working with you, Chief, down the road through whatever process we come up with as a group. Thank you.
I'd like to make a few comments. The voters have spoken, and it was a strong message. It was not really a close election based on my experience with local elections. And so I think we have something to learn from the process on that. But I'm really disappointed that especially at the front end of this process, that there was so much misinformation and flat-out lies about the district and about personnel in the district. And I think it was very misleading. In fact, some of us did go out and talk to neighbors in our neighborhood and try to answer their questions. And even at the very end of this process, I had people in my neighborhood questioning where the chief lived, or questioning that, asking how come he made so much money? Why does he make more than the Phoenix fire chief? All false information. And with a little bit of research, and I'm sure you're capable of doing that because there's some talented people out there in the audience, you knew that, okay? So they were just flat out lies, okay? And that's really unfortunate. It's one thing to oppose the bond. I get that. To oppose it on the grounds that maybe we can't afford it, or that maybe some of the projects aren't necessary, I totally get that. But to actually spread lies about staff and not just the fire chief, but other people, another person sitting here in the audience and at the table over here. So I'm really disappointed in that. I would like to make a couple comments about our chief. First of all, Chief Casey and I worked in local government for 39 years. And during that period of time, I've interacted with and supervised a number of fire chiefs, both in local government and now here, we work with you. And some of them were very, very outstanding chiefs, and some of them weren't so good. But I do have to say that during that 39-year period that I spent working in local government and interacting both with fire chiefs in local government and fire chiefs in districts, not only the Sedona Fire District, you were one of the finest fire chiefs that I've ever known during that entire 39 years. And I say that not just based on the fact that I'm on the board here and we're more or less your supervisor. I say it because when I was city manager, we had to work very closely on a number of issues, such as the slide fire issue. We were out traveling around the district, up in Flagstaff at meetings, working together on that, trying to coordinate city's resources with the fire department resources, Forest Service resources. And whenever there was an opportunity to come up with a better way to provide a service by working with the city or the city working with the fire district, you were all for it. And so I think you're an outstanding fire chief, and I hope that you stay here and that you have a long career in this district. The other thing I'd like to say is that through this process, I think I received a letter a couple of weeks ago claiming that the Citizens Bond Committee was involved in some sort of collusion, and there may have been some sort of illegal activities going on. What I would suggest to you that you do, if you have any evidence of that, I suggest that you provide that information to the county attorney's office or the state attorney general's office. If you have proof that there was any sort of collusion in this district, I think we all would feel the same way. If the law has been broken, then you need to do something about it and go to the county attorney's office or the state attorney general's office. Just don't make these allegations unless you're going to follow through and provide some documentation that is true. So I would encourage you to do that. That's how the process works. Thank you for your service, Chief.
Well, I would like to say that I am disappointed in the results of the bond because I did think it was the best financial mechanism to pay for some of the pressing needs, and especially the structural pressing needs of our district. I wanted to clear up a misstatement that was made by people who were opponents of the bond. They frequently said that it was that two people on the board were against the bond. And I can only speak for myself. I did vote no for the bond, but I voted no because I thought that a smaller size bond would be more effective and meet most of the needs of the district and be more acceptable to the public. But I was very much for the bond, and it was disappointing to see the opposition use that no vote to say that I was against it. I think in retrospect it might have been good for the board to first vote on how many of us wanted the bond to be the funding mechanism, and then secondly to vote on the size, and
perhaps if we pursue the bond in the future, that might be a way to go about it. Secondly, there's been quite a bit of publicity about how the proponents of the bond were funded. And certainly our newspaper, the Red Rock News, ran a very large front page article about their funding source. As you may know, the board and no staff can be involved in any kind of PAC, Political Action Committee, but there was a Political Action Committee formed to support the bond. There was also quite a bit of money spent to oppose the bond, with full-page ads in the paper and cards mailed out. And what concerns me is that we don't know where that money came from. There was one citizen's name, and then also the organization called Arizona Liberty, but they did not form a PAC, so we don't know the source of that money and how much of it came outside of the district, or perhaps even outside of the state. And I'm concerned about also the one person, the one citizen whose name was on most of the advertising against the bond. I'm concerned when one person's wealth can be used to try and manipulate a whole citizenry of our district. And then thirdly, I'd also like to echo, actually, board member Ernster's appreciation of our fire chief. I've had the pleasure, I guess you can say it, of working on budgets as a nurse manager earlier in various times in my career. I also worked for a small business running their entire financial operation. And so I have some background with working with budgets, and I can tell you that Chief Kazian's acumen with fiscal management is quite extraordinary, actually, and I suspect it really is superior to many fire chiefs, that you bring that ability to our board. And the reason that the levy hasn't gone up more than, what was it, 3-point-something% over the last 10 years is because of the cost-cutting measures that Chief Kazian has instituted. So with that, Chief, I want to thank you for the strong fiscal management of our district.
Thank you.
And for your dedication to keeping the budget as low as possible without cutting services, which we all know is so critical, that we continue to have the high-quality services that we do and the well-trained firefighters that we do, and the some excellent administrative support that backs everybody up.
I would like to echo everything that's been said before me. I agree with everything that's been said, and I'd like to add something else. I've been in city government for over 30 years as a finance director, and I've dealt with a lot of fire chiefs, police chiefs. And I, as the newest member of this board, I've got to say that I enjoy working with this chief because he's transparent and he's most fiscally conservative chief that I've known for a long time. Everything is being done correctly. He makes sure that his staff is conservative, and I find that that's something this community needs. Way back many years ago, I helped Don Har in his election, and we spoke about the fact that people need to be conservative. He is conservative. He's doing his job. And I must commend the members of the previous board who hired him. He did an excellent job. And we appreciate everything that he does. And we appreciate you for picking him. I'm disappointed the way the election went. I wish that there would have been less misinformation. It's something that should not have been used. we should have used real facts. But the deed is done. We have to work with the way things have gone, and people have spoken, and we will survive. And I need to commend the chief for doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you understand you have the board's full support and everything that you've done. We appreciate everything you did during the bond process. We'll go ahead and move on to canvassing the election.
Board, the next two items, you need to, your board packet should help you walk through that, but we have to formally take care of those things for the county. And Bill can help you with any legal questions, or I can help you procedurally. You have any questions?
Okay, so I just read this into the record? Okay. So pursuant to ARS 16-646, the governing board of the Sedona Fire District canvasses the results of the district's election held on November 7, 2017, and will vote to approve the results of the election, which were verified as of November 9, 2017. Total votes cast from both Yavapai and Coconino counties for SFD election were 5,937. The number of registered voters in the district is 12,791. The number of rejected ballots from all precincts was 39. The number of votes for the bond was 2,593, and the number of votes against the bond was 3,337. Certification of election results was signed by the Yavapai County Recorder Leslie M. Hoffman and Elections Director Lynn A. Constable on the 9th day of November 2017. So I will look for a motion to approve the canvass of election and to certify the results. I'll just make the motion since I'm reading it. I'll move to approve the canvass of election and to certify the results pursuant to ARS 16-642 and 16-643 as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, number 3, certifying the results of special election. That was part of it, so 2 and 3 are the same thing, okay. And item 4, purchase order 11122 in the amount of $31,000 to Yavapai County Elections for the special election. I'll move to approve purchase order 11122.
Second?
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Gabe, financial report?
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you have the October financial report in your packet. Give me 1 second to get it up here on my end. All right. So start off with the month of October. Our property tax revenue for the month was $5,145,000. We did catch up. If you remember last month, we were kind of trailing behind. And when we look at kind of our year-to-date projections here in a second, comparisons to budget to actual, you'll see we're actually ahead of the budget from a year-to-date perspective as well on tax collection. Non-levy revenue was at $324,332. We were over budget by $136,000 on non-levy revenue. The predominant factor for that being our ambulance transportation revenue. That's up over budget by $138,000 for almost $300,000 for the month of October. And speaking with Chief Pichur, a lot of that's been attributed to increased volume out of the village, correct, Chief? Yep. So on that, moving on to the expense side, personnel expenses for the month were at $924,000. Budget was just over $1 million, so we were under budget by $134,000 there. Vehicles and equipment were $47,000, $497, and budget again for the month was $88,982. We are trending under budget on vehicles and equipment year to date as well, and predominantly on fuel. We're still seeing some savings on our fuel costs, as well as vehicle repair and maintenance expenses. Mainly that using outside services for that has come in under budget so far to the month. However, again, in speaking with Chief Pichura, we've had some tire issues come up, so we'll probably start seeing that number come back in line with budget a little bit more. Utilities and communications were at $35,062. Meetings and training at $7,500. Managerial costs for the month were $83,280. And finally, capital and contingency expenses were at 28,644. Our total expenses for the month were 1.1 million. Budgeted for the month was 1.4, so we were under budget for the month on expenses by just under 300,000. For the year to date, and before I get into this, you may notice the slide looks a little different. We actually, my company, we had a kind of a staff meeting earlier this month, and one of the things that kind of came out of it was a lot of our other clients were liking seeing the previous year expenses as a year-to-date comparison. So you will notice I have added that into the slides. It's not an actual another report that's in your packet, but it is kind of updated on the slides to kind of see, so you can see not only where we're at from a budget standpoint, but where we're at from historical perspective standpoint. And when we look at that, you'll see revenue for the month was, I'm sorry, year to date, revenue is at $7,029,000. Property taxes being the lion's share of that at 1.3 million over budget for property tax standpoint. As if you look at the previous year comparison, you could see our previous year comparison is actually more in line with what we budgeted and what we projected. Because again, on that tax revenue, as I've explained to the board in the past, our tax revenue is budgeted based on our historical collection average. Total expenses year to date are at $4,794,000. We did have budget of $5,941,000, so we are under budget year to date by $695,000. As you look through kind of our categories on our expenses, personnel is continuing to trend under budget. Vehicles and equipment, as I explained before, is under budget, but sounds like we are going to have some costs come up to bring that more in line with budget. Utilities and communications at $52,452, which is still under budget. Managerial expenses are at $393,000, and capital and contingencies at $329,000. One thing I'll point out on the capital and contingency, there has not been any expense out of contingency this year. I kind of coached the board a little bit this year and the chief on lowering that threshold, and we have lowered it, and thus far we have not needed it, and we'll continue to monitor that through the rest of the fiscal year. Finally, this year-to-date expenses as a percentage, we're at 28% total expenses to date compared to our budget. Given the month that we're in, we should be at 33%, so we, as I explained, we are under budget, and this illustrates that more. Percentage of expenses, again, personnel being our predominant expense at 80%, operations and managerial are at 6%, and capital expenses are at 7%.
Gabe, could you explain the 80%? Is that a normal number? Is that tracking high, low compared to?
Yeah, so typically around the state, we look at fire departments, fire districts, their largest expense being personnel. And, we have anywhere from 75% to 85%. Unfortunately, one client of ours was up in the 90%. That's where you start to get in trouble. And they've taken some measures to bring that back down, but that's, kind of some of those normals that we see across the state and across the nation, actually, personnel being the highest expense.
And Gabe, also in terms of the capital and contingency at 7%, it could be helpful, I think, at this point to point out that we are building our capital fund, that has been one of the goals of the district to do, and how are we doing with that?
Yeah, so that'll explain right here on this next slide. So to Corey's point, when the district engaged our firm, we did notice the relatively low reserve fund balance and capital fund balance. So as you can see here, we ended the month of October with $7,395,000 in total cash. So that's in all funds. And then compared to last year, there was only $5,086,000. So at the beginning of the year, we had that PSPRS refund that we had to pay out. We're pretty much at the point where we have used up that credit. So this is a true short up year-over-year cash balance. So we have seen a nice increase. Now that's skewed a little bit because of our property tax collection. But I apologize, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I do want to say we did increase fund balance year over year by about a little over $1 million, which will go to capital funding and meeting the ongoing needs of the organization. or at least that's what I'd recommend. The board decides where it goes.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And the last thing I want to do is you may notice too that the numbers on this cash position, as well as the balance sheet that's included in your board packet, has more information. Historically, we reported on specific funds, the operating fund, the payroll fund, and the special projects fund. We have expanded it to show you our full audited balances on fixed assets and liabilities. So to get it, so the board has a better idea of what all of those things are included in there on a monthly basis instead of just at year end when you get your audit report. So you will see our total assets, our other assets, I should say, at the end of the month were $13,238,000 compared to $12,715,000 the prior year. Obviously, there was some purchasing of apparatus and equipment last year, which is attributed to that. The other thing, which is kind of unfortunate, is our receivable balances have risen both on ambulance, but more specifically wildland, because of the amount of wildland deployments we've been on across the nation, and not just us, but everywhere. The state is out of money on paying us for these wildlands, so now they're waiting till they get reimbursed by the feds before they pay on our invoices. So that's approximately $200,000 at the end of October. So we've already expended the cost for the personnel, for the equipment, for the lodging. So when we do receive that money, that'll be additional money that'll increase that fund balance that we just talked about. Unless there's any other questions, that concludes my financial report. The last thing that I want to add is we do anticipate having Jay Park with Walker Armstrong here next month to present the audit report. And as I mentioned last month, the audit went really well. There's no issues. The report, and I mean you'll hear it from him as well, but but the audit went really well, and so he'll be here next month. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe. Need a motion to approve financial report?
I move to approve the financial report. Sorry, Corey.
No, good.
Is there a second?
Second.
That would be the October 2017 financial report, and I'll second that.
Okay. So I got a first and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, chief report.
Board, I decided to throw this up and be fancy like Gabe. Instead of talking about it, we'll show it on the screen for the viewing audience. I think you can look at the call summary here for 2017 year to date. You can see where ambulance, well, Chief by Chair mentioned we're seeing more calls in the village, which is a longer response time, creating a little bit different revenue model. Our overall costs, or number of calls is actually down in ambulance and interfacilities, by the way. So that's trending down, but fires are up, and a couple others are up or even, kind of somewhat neutral along the way. At the end of the day, you see we're up about, what was that, 25 calls for the year, I think that is. You'll see our average response time being 6 minutes and 15 seconds. You do note this one time here that is 5 minutes. That average response time is a little bit skewed because of the arson incident that we had at the West Sedona complex. Because we arrived for one call and then subsequently found 10 other fires, that was a 0 response time. So that helps us, I guess, from that, but it's not, it doesn't legitimately reflect what we really went to. And so it's hard to tell exactly what that number is, but that's how the numbers get reported in our firehouse reporting software, according to our fire marshal and the way it works. So it is what that is. So any questions on the total number? Another 400. You know, it's the third time this year we've had over 400 calls in the year. That's busy stuff for folks. We certainly heard Mr. Spring mention about the response times and things like that. You know, the more calls we're having, they've been to 2 residential since we've been sitting here. I don't know what they were, but you know, they had 2 possible fires or a gas leak or something like that happening, where all the crews go to that, and so we're busy. What's interesting is the backcountry rescue year to date, we're at 96 year to date, whereas last year we're at 67. So that is a testament to our, you know, the recreations and things that are happening, the busyness of the town. You know, it's substantially more if you look at those two numbers.
Chief, that's a 50% increase, if you look at those numbers.
Yeah.
And the kind of training that goes into being able to perform well in those kind of rescues is certainly something that we put a lot of effort into.
The training and the resources as well that go into that. So, you know, we haven't had any epic rescues in a while. They've all been fairly bread and butter type operations, if you will. You know, you're out for an hour, hour and a half type of stuff as a general statement. We occasionally get a 2.5 hour one, but no 4 and 6 and 8 hour ones as of late. So the good news is they haven't been too treacherous.
Chief,
Yes.
question on that. Do you have any thoughts as to why it's increased by 50%? Is it just more tourism, more people walking out in the backcountry?
I will give it to my operations chief.
There, according to the Forest Service, there's a lot of hikers in the system, and that's across the entire Valley Red Rock District. They've seen about a 30 to 40% increase in them. In most cases, a lot of these folks are coming in ill-prepared, and we're seeing a lot of dehydration incidents, which are the lower level if they're not severe dehydration. In some cases, we're seeing very minor injuries and reliance upon 911 to help me through my minor moment. But then again, we do have some serious ones where people are falling and severe injury, like we had on Bell Rock when we had to use DPS Ranger to fly off a patient from the top at dusk. So we do have residents that call us on backcountry rescues as well. We've had folks along the airport trail get overheated, and we've assisted them as well. So it's a blend, mostly visitors, but we do have some residents that need assistance.
Chief Pachera, you know, we definitely had an uptick in the number of bikes out on the trails, and I'm wondering, do they contribute? Are we seeing more accidents and need for help associated with the people who are on their bikes, or are they handling themselves pretty well?
Well, in the last month, I've heard 4 incidents where we've had folks flip out of the bikes and become injured, and that's an uptick from prior months. Usually it's about 1 a month we get. So it's the season, it's beautiful, it's a great time to get out there and hit the trails, and we're just seeing those folks coming to visit, and the folks that live here out visiting the systems.
I wouldn't suspect to see decreases in these. This seems to be probably a trend that will be fairly sustaining, would be my guess. Well, the dips and valleys we might get, but I think overall you're seeing a continued trend by the stuff I'm reading and seeing. Grants, I just like to report that we received a $1,400 grant to supply wildland firefighting tuition reimbursement for the Wildland Fire Academy, which will happen in March of 2018. No match associated with that. We are looking at Pulse Point Foundation, which is an organization. I'll let Jeff talk a little bit about it, but we've submitted a grant, and a $20,000 grant that will be fully funded the first year, and if it's awarded to us, we would have an ongoing cost of about $1,700 in subsequent years. So if you want to talk a little bit about Pulse Point?
So Pulse Point is an app on the phone. It works on Droid and Apple products, and when it's incorporated into a community, it has a layer for AEDs that are inventoried and placed and updated by the agency. So we actually have an AED mapping layer that we maintain throughout our community. That would be uploaded. And anytime someone has an event where they require CPR, Pulse Point sends a signal to those phones in that area. So it automatically has a beeping thing saying, there's a phone in the area. It'll hit it, strike it, and say there's a medical emergency at this address. You're the closest person to respond, while also a fire department's responding. So it's an automatic CAD link piece. We say from our dispatch center, heart attack, dispatch the engine and the ambulance. Pulse Point is sent a message, and then it sends out the code to anyone who can sign up to Pulse Point. Generally, those folks have CPR training, and now we call it continuous compression certifications. And they can go and either grab the AED or begin compressions and begin the immediate life-saving processes until we can arrive and carry on. So Pulse Point is a nonprofit group. It started in the San Ramon area, California, and it's attributed to over 1,000 rescues to date, or saves, throughout the nation, and they're spreading internationally. And we would not be the first community to do it. I don't know the exact number of communities engaged in the Pulse Point, but it's a growing trend. And since we CPR or CCR, a number of residents today, it's an opportune time to engage those resources in community to help community members or visitors when they're having a bad day.
This would be a regional grant, so it'll be the entire Verde Valley that would get this technology that's all dispatched out of the same regional dispatch center. So that's one of our firefighters, Josh Wells, wrote the grant, and we're in the final 3 at this point. So if awarded, they would do the installation and the first year's cost at a $20,000 price tag to do the implementation and everything, and then there would be an ongoing cost of about $8,000 a year, which would be split by all the agencies based upon their use in the dispatch center, the formula we use for determining our cost essentially in the dispatch center. So if we looked at this actually probably 3-4 years ago, but it was in the midst of all the dispatch stuff kind of happening, and it didn't make sense to implement it with what was on the horizon. So that is cool to see it coming back to life here, and hope we get a chance to see this happen. So no outlay for the first year whatsoever, and if we get it, it's $1,700 a year after that. So any questions on that? All right. Looking at this, we got this done. This is a celebration moment. I'm glad there's some folks here to enjoy it. So we talked about our still response and our actual responses. Tricia, who's done the annual report for the last 23 years or whatever, she's excited not to have to do another one next year. She has reports our still district calls. So that's just the number of calls we had. That's what we thought people wanted to know, but apparently we found out through this last process that people wanted to know more. So we're providing you this information. Up in the top corner is the September, and the bottom one is October. Those are the actual calls. So the blue bar is the number of calls in that still district. So in Station 1 still district, they typically have more calls than they can handle, meaning other stations have to come in and take their calls because they're very busy in the Station 1 district. And that's where Station 4 typically comes in. And so they actually went on 124 calls, and that's in their district and in other districts for that matter. You can see Station 3, which, I was looking at October there, sorry. And then looking at the Station 3, which is very busy in their still district, as Jeff just mentioned, that they're very busy in the ambulance calls in that world. And they actually ran 128 calls and went to 128 calls in their still district. Not sure those are all exactly the same. That might just be ironic that those are the same numbers. Station number 4, you can see had less calls, but went on more calls. Had less calls in their still district, but went on more calls because again, they're traveling into Station 1 and Station 6. They're running into Station number 5. They actually run into Station number 4 frequently. Oh, I'm sorry, Station number 3 frequently. Station number 5 in the Canyon. Look at those 2 months. It was certainly a busy month in September in the Canyon, and then it slowed down a little bit, as we might suspect, coming into October. But they pretty much stay home being up in the canyon and take those calls as they happen in the canyon for the most part. And then lastly, Station number 6, which is lots of folks talking about where those calls are. So they had 19 calls in October in their still district, but went to 73 incidents. So that's the value of Station number 6 and why we show you the difference between still district calls and total calls. Any questions on that? Does that make sense?
Well, Chief, I just think it's very helpful to have this, and I hope we continue this as a way of tracking statistics of our, where the responses are for each station. Very helpful.
Well, we got the report written. We're going to use it. Trust me. It was a lot of work to get that figured out. I just shared a new thing with you guys here. This is incident by time of day. Just as folks might think we don't have any calls in the middle of the night, we roll up the carpet, and we don't go anywhere. You can certainly see the block in the middle. You know, we're really busy at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it tapers off one way or the other as you go to the left or to the right. But as you look from 10 o'clock on until, say, 7 o'clock, so 7 o'clock in the morning means 7 o'clock to 7:59. That's how those time blocks go. So you can see that there's quite a few calls that have happened year to date at all times of the night, at any one of those given times throughout the year. So you can do the math on how those work and calculate those, but we don't sit home and sleep all night like some may believe. Community risk management, I'll let you talk to
Board, as you can see, we are staying very busy in CRM. We just had Eric Walter, I think you know, he came on as our community paramedic, and for the first month he was largely kind of getting his feet underneath him in the community paramedicine role, and we've just in the last couple weeks he's started to help out more with fire inspections and getting his feet wet there, so I expect to see some growth there. You can see under our compliant fire protection systems, those are fire alarm systems, fire sprinkler systems. We are steadily increasing the number of percentage of systems that are compliant. They require annual inspections, and as we continue to track those and are doing a better job of making sure that people are getting those serviced on a regular basis, that compliance is climbing. One other thing that's happening in community risk management is that we've started a dialogue with the city regarding they're revamping their landscaping codes, and we're trying to work with them to get them to adopt more fire-wise, fire-safe, friendly codes rather than having such dense planting of trees and brush around houses. We're trying to get them to consider some other options, and we're just starting that process, but we've had some very productive meetings.
I'd like to highlight the inspection bars here. If you look at this, this is 2016 and the inspections that were happening, and by no means with no disrespect for anything that was happening in 2016, but compared to where we are in 2017 as we're leveraging some technology, as we've ramped up Carla Dufour in her skill as an admin in that position, it's directly correlated to how our success has been exponentially improved. Almost that same 50, well, it's almost 100%, I guess, actually, if I'm doing my math right. I want to be accused of not knowing math. Yeah, that's almost 100% average. So we've increased exceptionally under John's leadership, and we continue to do so. I would suspect with Eric Walter coming on, who's doing part CIP as well as inspections, we'll even see that go up, and we're still not even touching the iceberg. I mean, we're on it, but we still have a long way to go. Would that be accurate?
That would be very accurate. We have over 2,300 commercial occupancies in our fire district. Now, when you see, last month we had 212 inspections. That's not 212 unique occupancies. Some of these occupancies, there's an initial inspection, a follow-up, and then maybe a second follow-up. So while we're making a dent, it's not like we've visited 212 unique occupancies. So you're right. It's the tip of the iceberg, but we're seeing more of that iceberg as we go along.
Very, very impressed. So good work. Thank you, John, to you and your team. Training. Some of the things in training I just want to point out. It's hard to believe we had firefighter Butler, Ham, and Combs here 6 months ago. It just seems like the other day that we had those folks. We got the three folks you got to meet today just finished up their 3-week orientation and just hit shift, I think it was a Saturday or two ago, like 8 or 9, 10 days ago, something like that. We hosted a cool program, a Train the Trainer Stop the Bleed program, so along the lines of CPR or CCR, not the Creative Clearwater Revival CCR, by the way, but this is along those same lines. I believe if you can create opportunities for people to stop bleeding, you'll save lives, and so there's a new training going on, like AEDs, where you'll have AEDs in boxes. There'll be stop the bleed compartments that'll have the tools and equipment to create compression to stop bleeding and things like that, tourniquet, whatever else the parts and pieces are to help make a difference in people's lives. So it's a new step in elevating our preparedness in the community. got a couple folks completing their task books. That's a really cool thing. I mean, we require people to step through all these processes. It's very rigid and structured to be prepared to take on the next level of responsibility. So Captain Kurtz and firefighter Mian Zirita finished one a battalion chief book and one an engineer task book, but that qualifies them to act in that capacity. It tells us as management that they've done all the skills to be prepared and ready to act in that role. And so those are good moments, and that's part of the promotional process as well as getting those completed. So lots of stuff there. We had a couple other things going on. There's busy stuff there. So donations, kind of a busy month for donations, so $183. So that's that. Remind you that next month's board meeting is in December 13th. It's a week early in honor of the holidays. And I'm going to go back to my computer to see what is left on my agenda. And if anyone, Jeff, you got it up there or no?
I've got communications
Yes,
stuff.
go for it.
So Cottonwood. So we finally got our fire stats rolling and going, and we've got some data pieces fixed. And so here's the new report. For the month of October, the national standard for call processing using emergency medical dispatch protocols, and that's for the screening of the type of call. And that allows us a response mode, so whether we go with lights and sirens for a critical patient or non-emergent, which is reducing the risk to everybody on the streets. Code 1, we call it. So these are just for code 3 incidents relative to really emergent, got to get there quickly. So the national standard is 2-minute call processing for those screenings. Cottonwood dispatch was 90%, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So 15 seconds over the national standard. Prior month, they were 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Year-to-date calendar, they are 1 minute and 58 seconds. So they're doing well, and they're constantly trying to enhance and improve their starts. And if you remember, months ago, we were in the mid 2-minute range. So there's continuous improvement engaged. So, and these are for you, Corey.
Thank you. It's just great to hear because it adds to our overall time it takes to get to the person in need. And so I want to thank you for your efforts in that, which I know have been very big, and also to all of us for voting for that fire stats. It's really been helpful. I'm gleaming that it's helped them up their game a bit more by having some data to work with.
It has, and in fact, we've given them the code to get into the system so that their manager can actually look at shifts and people relative to time of day stuff to see how it's going between their 3 covered shifts, 3 or 2, I forget. But they can look at individual days and people to check their performance as well. So it's all good stuff.
With that, I have just a reminder, Over the Edge, December 9th, we'll be helping raise money for Special Olympics. You saw the police chief here for the swearing in and his commander, and they'll be going over the edge as well. So that's happening. You might have saw an ad in the newspaper about that as well. And then last thing, correspondence and thank you letters. The only thing I'll add about that is Gabe spoke to the state. We've included a letter from the state talking about how many fires there were in the state this year, exceptionally more than average, and which has tied up their funding. They're out of funds and things like that. So it was a very, very busy year. I think it's interesting to look at how many invoices they've audited. You know, it's 2,800 invoices they've had to receive and cipher through and pay. It's an extraordinary amount of work for the folks at the state to do that. You know, it's just impressive. So they're continuing to be busy there. So any questions on either of those? It's considerably lower than it used to be. We had a lot more in the past owed, and they've been exceptional. And with this last little piece, they at least sent a letter saying we're going to be a little bit delayed. Please bear with us, which is very, very forward thinking on their behalf and
Chief,
something
is there
we
any concern about the federal government, ultimately they're getting the money that they need
Oh.
dispersed to us.
Yeah, I don't think there's any concern that that won't be refunded or won't be reimbursed at all. It's just a matter of the waiting. A year or two ago, no, I can't remember, they passed a prompt pay bill. A year ago, they passed a prompt pay bill because there were so many agencies that were literally sitting on $1 million of output to help fight fires for the state and for the federal government. And it was creating considerable cash flow problems. And so this prompt pay bill was allowing there to be a quick turnaround, which has been great, except that I think I talked to the forester and he said, like, it was like July, it was at AFTA, or AFCA, like July 20th. He said they already spent their entire budget by July 20th, which started July 1st in wildfire. I mean, so it's not funded it needs to be, and the formulas are interesting, to say the least, but it will get reimbursed. Back to your great question. With that, I don't think I have anything else on the chief's report, unless you have any more questions.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Last item on this section, everybody got the new proposed fire board calendar for 2018. Any concerns about the proposed dates? Okay, so I would move to approve the proposed 2018 fire board calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, John?
If you'll recall, last month, one of the items that I mentioned was heating systems and having a working carbon monoxide detector. This month, I wanted to speak a little bit about home heating and alternative sources of heating. Heating fires are the second leading cause of home fires. Fixed and portable space heaters, including wood stoves, are involved in 74% of fire fatalities. Nearly half of all American families use an alternative source of heating. The half of all home heating equipment fires occur during the 3-month period of December, January, and February. So the important things are to remember that space heaters, including wood stoves, need space. You should never have combustibles within 3 feet of those. They should never be left unattended. And when you are considering purchasing a space heater, look for a model that shuts off automatically should it tip over. And finally, remember, I preach this all the time, but having a working smoke detector in your house cuts your chance of dying in a home heating fire by 50%.
All right,
That's all.
okay. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.